Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending where you are joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Chelsea from Business Review, and I will be your host. It is our pleasure to have LabTwin and dsm-firmenich with us today, who will be presenting this webinar, Empowering DMSM Scientists with Voice-Powered Digital Lab Assistants to Improve R&D Efficiency. Before we begin, I would like to welcome you to our webinar platform On24. You'll notice that this webinar is browser-based. If so, for if any reason you disconnect, please just click on the link you've received via email to rejoin the session. In order to ask questions, you can ask them in the questions widget. Just type them into the box at the top right-hand corner of your screen and click submit. We will allocate some time at the end of the session to address any questions or thoughts that you may have. Please use the yellow help widget if you require any assistance to move, resize, and maximize any of the windows in front of you to get a better view of the slides. Now, please allow me to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker, Willi Gottstein, is a senior scientist at dsm-firmenich dedicated to building the lab of the future. In his current role, he leads a project on self-driving labs, the combination of lab automation and AI into autonomous experimentation platforms, which are applied to optimize food products. He is further responsible for the piloting and rollout of software tools across R&D sites. Our second speaker, Célia Gasselin, who joined LabTwin after several years of experience in international research and science communication. After pursuing a PhD in neurosciences, Célia joined the highly innovative Swiss institution EPFL as a neuroscientist, where she performed the state-of-the-art V-Val experiments. I will now hand over to our first speaker, Willi Gottstein.
Thanks a lot, Chelsea, for the nice introduction, and also welcome everyone. Quite exciting to be here and to talk with you about what dsm-firmenich is doing in terms of digital lab assistants. And the title might trigger two questions. What is dsm-firmenich? You might know DSM, you might know Firmenich, but what is dsm-firmenich? These two companies merged, and last week, so not very recently, we had our day one. So it's now one company. And the other question might be, why is a company like dsm-firmenich interested in digital lab assistants, right? And you can imagine if you're in the lab, you have your safety goggles on, you have your gloves on, you run your experiment, and you suddenly observe something unexpected, right? And you would like to make a note of it so that you don't forget. What options do you have? Well, you could rely on your memory that you then note it down later, or you have to go through the process of taking these gloves off, then get your notebook somewhere, right? And then note it down. However, that really leads then to an interruption of the experiment. The other thing is it might just be dark, right? So you might, or I hope you still hear me, but you probably don't see me anymore. And if you, for example, work with microscopes in dark rooms, you might not even have the chance to note anything down because you cannot see anything. So we will hear about the digital lab assistant much more later on, but these were, let's say, motivations for us to look into these type of solutions to really improve the R&D efficiency we are dealing with when it comes to note-taking, transcription of notes, and reporting in general. But before we dive into this one, a few numbers about the newly formed company dsm-firmenich. So first of all, this company is purpose-led. So the purpose for us is we want to bring progress to life. And there we built on the shoulders of giants, as one says. We have in total more than 250 years of business experience combined out of these two companies. We operate multinational in 340 sites in nearly 60 countries worldwide. And we have by now roughly 30,000 employees. And these 30,000 employees are distributed over 4 business groups or business units. Perfumery and beauty, health, nutrition and care, taste, texture and health, and animal nutrition and health. And all of those work towards the same goal, as mentioned earlier. We want to bring progress to life. And what does that mean? Well, I essentially want to combine three different forces. And these forces are the essential, the desirable, and the sustainable. Essential, in the end, links to everything which is related to food. So all of us have to eat, no matter whether we are humans or animals, to survive, to live, and to be healthy. And so that's definitely an essential part. And ideally, this food is not only something that keeps us alive, but ideally it also tastes well. It smells good. The same holds then for perfumery, right? So ideally that also smells good, and that's then really a desirable thing. But all of those things do not really matter if we are in a failing world, right? So all of these solutions we provide should also meet the requirements the planet brings to us. So all of those should also be, all these solutions should then also be sustainable. And these three forces together will then bring us progress. If we then look in a bit more detail, what type of projects are we then talking about? So for example, if we start at the bottom, we produce in a vegetarian way omega-3 fatty acids, DHA, which are linked to brain and eye health. So yeah, very important. We further work on plant-based food products and want to produce those in a very sustainable way. The same holds then for perfumery. So also that one we want to produce in a very sustainable way. And another project, Bouvert, or product, is linked to methane emissions of cows, which we would like to reduce. So Bouvert is a food supplement which then heavily reduces the methane excretion by animals. So there are many more projects, but those are a small selection. And what have all these projects in common? Well, all of them rely on proper R&D. And we have very creative scientists, highly motivated people, and usually they prefer to spend their time on the scientific part rather than the reporting and documentation. And that is something, as already explained in the beginning, something we wanted to make much more efficient, right? So the goal for us was to really think about how can we improve our documentation process in the lab, which is currently rather time-consuming and inefficient, because we still rely a lot on paper and so on, which then needs to be transcribed. So the starting point for us was to imagine if everyone in the lab could have a personal assistant that could take notes and ideally transcribes those directly in an ELN, helps with the walkthrough through protocols, manages the agenda, directly notes down observations we will make, so that experimentalists in the lab really have a full focus on the experiment and spend less time on the documentation. And the good news is that such an assistant exists already, which is LabTwin, and we started to work with it already a few years ago. And we will hear much more by Célia later on, Célia, sorry, what this LabTwin is about, but already a bit of a heads up. So at the bench, all you need is in the end your phone, either iOS or Android. So it's an app, a mobile app, and you need some kind of headset, AirPods or whatever headset you prefer. You can then go in the lab, talk to it, and then either retrieve information or get your notes directly transcribed. And then once you're done, you can go back to your desk, open the web browser, log into your LabTwin app, and then you see all your notes directly transcribed. And we will see examples on this later on. So that was, let's say, the overall concept. We would like to have such an assistant. People should go to the lab, transcribe all the notes they make, retrieve information already to make everything a bit more efficient. Question is it actually more efficient, right? So it's a nice toy, one can say, but does it also bring the value we want? And that's in the end what always matters for companies like us. So what we did was that we measured the time savings themselves, and that is also then written in the header. So we estimated that we save, based on the functionality we had available back then, roughly 1 hour per user per week on documentation processes. So for imaging, sample prep, method development, so whatever we do in the lab. So roughly an hour per user per week. So that was reasonably easy to measure. And the time savings is not everything. So we're also really concerned about the quality of the research we do, so that we ideally also increase the reproducibility of experiments, which also requires scientists to note everything down which is required to reproduce an experiment. The question was a bit, how do we measure quality? And what we did back then was that we asked scientists to go through all the notes they take in LabTwin for a certain protocol, and then tell us whether they would have documented that without LabTwin, if they had recalled it from memory and then transcribed later, whether they would have captured it on paper first and then transcribed later, or whether they would have typed it directly into an ELN or MS Office application. And the results are shown here. So we can see that only 15% of the notes would have been directly put in a digital format. 35% would have been captured on paper and then transcribed later. And then the other half would have been not documented at all, or would have been recalled from memory. And a lot of us have a really good memory, but there can always be something wrong with it as well. So here we then really see a clear benefit. We definitely take much more notes. The documentation is much more complete. And in addition, we also save time on documentation in general. So that's a bit where we are. The question is then, where do we want to go? And that's then depicted here. So LabTwin will then really be a central hub in the lab for capturing information, data, observation, what we mentioned earlier. So for all the work we do, the observations should be directly transcribed in a digital format and then be integrated with our ELN. And Célia will show later on what that actually looks like. So we have a little video about this. Further, you can also access a protocol library to access all the protocols we have. And then LabTwin would guide you through these procedures. One can also retrieve, and also that is something we will see later on, one can retrieve then information about chemicals, how much is available, where it is available. Ideally, one can also at some point then couple it to an ordering system. And that's a bit what we have in mind, so that people can really go in the lab, retrieve all the information they need using voice, and also noting down everything which is relevant for their experiments, also only using voice. And again, not because it's a nice technology, but because we really believe that that will heavily improve the reproducibility of our experiments we are running, and saves a lot of time for people in the longer run when it comes to documentation and reporting as well. And so that was, let's say, a rough overview of what we're doing, what we plan to do. And Célia will then walk you through much more detail, and also gives you much more detail about what LabTwin actually is.
Thank you so much, Willi, for this nice overview of how is it working at DSM. So now we'll deep dive a bit more in the technology itself. And at first, as Willi showcased very well with his glove and goggles, I want to shed light a bit on this different situation that we find and we encounter at every client site where we're going. So I would like you to do this small mental game now of trying to figure out what the scientists on the left side are trying to do. Some of them are trying to find the correct ELN field to enter the observation. Some are trying to keep track of the sample position, and some are trying to find out what is the next step for that protocol. And so you see there's even more situations than just having gloves and performing experiment. One can think that having a laptop in the lab is sometimes a solution, but it's not always the case. So I'm actually giving you the answer directly. And as you can see, this scientist trying to write the position of the sample on his glove. This is a very classic situation. Funny enough, writing on the glove is something that we find very intuitive in the lab to store information, but that is also not so great to keep this information long, and afterwards we need to retype it somewhere. Following also a protocol step on a paper, ideally printed also with a font that is a bit bigger than font 10 and without a splash of the medium on the part where we need to read the information. This is also something that we end up doing a lot in the lab, and that is not the easiest while we're running experiment. And as I was saying, also entering information in the ELN can be sometimes a bit tricky. It's good to have the data there at the end, but the process of entering it while we're at the lab can be a bit challenging. Whether it's your personal computers that you need to carry around in the lab, or it's a shared also station, that's what we see sometimes. But this involved you logging to this platform and opening your ELN, finding back where you need to store information, filling up all the menu and sub-menus. And this is something that also involves time and interruption of your experiment. So this is why at LabTwin, actually, we are developing a digital lab assistant that is designed to be used in the lab while running experiment. And we are taking in consideration all these challenges, and we are trying to make our product as user-friendly or scientist-friendly as possible. So it can be used hands-free. You can have still the visual feedback if you need, because you can put your iPhone or Android phone on a stand, or an iPad or tablet also on a stand if you want to have a bigger visual feedback. And then you just need to speak to it. Usually we recommend also wearing a headset, because then this ensures a very good transcription quality. So of course, the first thing that we always hear when we're talking about voice is, oh, I know, this is like a Siri or Alexa. Well, is it really working? Does it understand me? Because Siri never do exactly what I want it to do. Fair enough. We all got annoyed with voice assistant, but I would like you to remember that these assistants are developed for the consumer market. They're trying to please everyone and do everything. And usually they also have different hidden goals than yours, because that's what happened with free services. And for example, Alexa's goal is not so much to support you, but also to sell more airtime on Amazon. So this is a bit of a different situation compared to Digital Lab Assistant, where we are really trying to solve a solution and not trying to find use cases for a technology. And compared to the consumer voice assistant, we are training our voice assistant to understand scientific words. We are trying to understand all the scientific jargon, but also the units that we're using in the lab, all the different parameters that makes it very accurate for a scientist. And that's why we managed to reach an accuracy of 95%. That is much bigger than what you can reach with a Google Assistant or Amazon Alexa, for example. So what do I mean when I say we are training our speech model? I mean that we can train on life science terminology. We can be the protocols. We can be some specific IP terms that you're using in the lab, the name of a new protein, but also the voice itself of the scientist and its notes. So the more you're using, the more is also becoming trained to your own way. And then afterwards, we are training also the model to understand the scientific formatting, and all of this together, we reach this 90% accuracy. So, okay, digital lab assistant can understand the scientist, so we can capture voice note, but it's not the only thing that it can do, because to be a digital lab assistant, then it needs to also support the different activities that you need to do in a lab regarding documentation. The digital lab assistant can follow interactive procedures and help you to be guided through it by an interaction, reading out some steps, triggering some timers whenever you need, and prompting you to enter data at the right moment. You can capture extra voice note at any moment, but you can also capture visual data such as photos, scanning barcodes, Or if you take a photo, we can also directly extract the data from the photo through optical character recognition. This prevents you from having to say or write down a lot number, for example, which is quite annoying to report, as some of you have tried in the lab. The assistant can also fill up tables, and then the data that you're entering by voice is directly going in the right cell, preventing you or afterwards to have to fit it back to Excel tables. We can export this directly in a CSV format. And you can also access data, as Willi enlightened before, in the lab. So what do I mean to access data? This can be multiple data. It can be the inventory. Where is located my reagent, blah, blah, blah. It can be reaching out to safety information, for example. Oh, I'm using this new product that I'm not familiar with. Do I need glove for it? Or how do I discard it? This is some questions that are often rising when you're in the lab using the reagent itself. Can access also different scientific knowledge. That can be some step in the protocols, or if something happened that was not supposed to happen, you can also query some information regarding it. And also instrument status. So it can be, is my run already finished, or has this balance been calibrated, and when and by whom? So all this information can be queried through a digital lab assistant. And I was mentioning earlier, we can also support procedures. So there is a platform on the web app that can allow you to enter any type of protocol in a very interactive way, that you can set your own and edit it at any moment to adapt it. This is very simple and very easy to do, and then you just need to execute it in the lab. We're also working right now on having this automatically filled up because we are leveraging AI capabilities to break down the protocol into a LabTwin workflow. So all these features can be used in a lot of different use cases. You've seen some of them already mentioned by Willi, but overall, this is the use case that we find across our clients. Sample preparation is a very classic one, and I will show you an example just afterwards. Method development, it's something also that is very important, because here the documentation is crucial. When you're running new experiment in the lab and you're tweaking some parameters and you're observing new reactions, you want to be able to fast register whatever is happening, what are the new settings that you're putting on the machine, or also describe any deviation that appears. And this is important for afterwards the protocol update. In vivo study, when you manipulate animals in the lab, of course, your hands are full, and it's very difficult to type something or to write down something when you have a rat on your shoulder, even though some person are very skilled with that. I can witness that in the lab. Imaging, as Willi showcased very nicely at the beginning, when you're in the dark, it's very difficult to write down some information. But also, you don't want to lose the focus. You want to keep your eyes on the microscope and describe whatever you're seeing when you're navigating through your slices, and not having to stop and write down something. Lab automation, and this is also something very interesting. Excuse me. If you're setting up a new robot, for example, in the lab, and you need to tweak the parameter, observe how this robot is behaving, you also want to keep the focus on the robot and being able just to voice any change that you want to make, or any behavior the robot is doing. GMP QC testing, this is also a lot of documentation involved, a lot of tracking. You want to register everything that you're doing, and this is very nicely automated by LabTwin. Sterile, clean environment, of course, if you can't touch anything, you don't want to contaminate anything, you don't want to move paper around. This is also a very nice use case. So as I mentioned, sample preparation is a very classic one. So this is how we would go with LabTwin. You would first record the materials and the reagent and the instruments that you're using through barcode scanning, through optical character recognition, or just a voice note. Then you would, for example, weigh the sample on a balance, and you would just enter the weight in a table. Afterwards, you can always also enter any observation about an anomaly, a sample that look different, a procedure that you want to repeat, a filtering that you didn't plan to do that you would do. And this can be entered with a timestamp during the procedure. Then when you do to do calculations such as dilution, you just need to hear back from LabTwin the result of your calculation. You don't have to perform it. You don't have to doubt your calculations, which is also something very nice. And more importantly, at the end of the day, you don't need to track back all this note that you've been taking on maybe different medium. All your information is stored back on your ELN or LIMS or wherever you want it to be. And I'm going to show you now actually all this in a video because this is much easier to see it in action.
In the lab,
Hey LabTwin. Open protocol.
I'm using LabTwin.
Opening protocol blot cell treatment.
It guides me.
Step 1. Pipette 250 microliters of lysis buffer into each sample and mix well.
Step by step, through my experiment.
Add note.
I can record notes.
Sample 1 contains cell lysate contamination.
On the spot,
Add photo.
and take photos of my observations in their context.
Next step.
Step 6. LSB buffer dilution. Batch 1 volume, milliliter.
Sometimes,
2.
using a table is more convenient to calculate dilutions.
Batch 1 dilution factor.
100.
Batch 1 volume antibody, milliliter, is 1.98.
Next.
Step 7. Protocol complete. Would you like to send the protocol results to the ELN?
Yes.
And the best thing of the day is knowing that when I'm back at my desk, all my notes and pictures are already in my ELN and structured.
So I hope this helped to understand the process a bit more in situ. And then also in this video, what you were a bit more able to see is actually everything that happens below the surface of the data capture, because LabTwin can automatically process this data. We capture the voice notes, the pictures, it had some timestamps, some usernames, and then it can label it, interlink it, structure it before sending it to any data repository. And it can ultimately match the structure that you need for the data to be easier to access afterwards and understood by anyone else. And LabTwin can do that actually because it understands the content of the data. It is smart, and you need this capability to be able, for example, to understand actions that are requested by the scientist. So here, for example, when a scientist is asking to remind me tomorrow at 12 to prepare the samples, LabTwin can understand that, oh, there's a date, there's a time, and there's an action to be reminded of, and create directly a reminder. And so this similar capability here that is named entity recognition is something that can be leveraged to process and sort this data. So here, for example, you can see that this note taken by the scientist has been processed and can be labeled as a deviation. And this is very interesting because it supports you into handling the data afterwards and organizing it already. When you have all this data labeled, what you can do is, if this shift wants to work, unfortunately it doesn't. So what you could see normally, it's like on the left side, you have different notes, and then all these notes are categorized, and it's the category of this note, for example, deviation, can be recognized, or if it's a reagent, or if it's a methods step. And then all the report can be automatically generated, putting this information at the right place, following whatever template that you want to have, maybe also a standard one across your team. And this automatic report can be also done at an extra level, and this is what we've done also for a client of ours, where the team experiment were compiled into one team report once a month, where it was gathered all this insights about each experiment, how many were completed, how many were having deviation and how many deviation, who were the operators in this experiment. And this really saves some time to whoever need to process this data afterwards. So what we can say in general about LabTwin is that it helps to save time. So the first step is quite easy to see. If you do on-screen notes while you're running the experiment, you have no more interruptions, and therefore you save time. And if you have automatic data processing and uploading, then you don't have to type down the report by your own, and then it's also save time. But by also lowering the threshold for this documentation, you end up capturing more data with LabTwin. And this was also one of the numbers that Willi shared at the beginning. We realized that with LabTwin, we are capturing 16% more data than if the person is using the other methods of documentation. On the other side, if you reduce also this delay in documentation by not keeping it in memory, you reduce the risk of errors. And this is an analysis that we've done with another client, a top pharma that unfortunately I cannot name yet, where we realized that from all this data kept in memory, 20% of it ended up wrongly transcribed by the scientists, because it's natural to make mistake when you keep something in mind for a while. And so this extra data and increased quality of the data end up creating a higher reproducibility of the experiment. And of course, if you have a higher reproducibility, you don't need to repeat the experiment. And if you don't need to repeat this experiment, you also save time. So this was all this path leads to saving time. And there's a small path at the bottom that is good for sustainability, which is to reduce the presence of paper in the lab, also for safety reasons. And before finishing, I just want to present quickly my team. So I'm part of LabTwin. We've been pioneering the voice in the lab since 2019. We are around 50 employees located in Berlin. We're all coming from very diverse backgrounds of life science, informatics, change management, etc. And we are backed by Sartorius and BCG Digital Adventures, which is a great support for us as a startup. So thank you very much. And if you want much more information, if you want to have a demo, if you want to talk about your specific use case, please reach out to us and we're happy to discuss it or show you a live demo of LabTwin. And now we're happy to take your questions.
Thank you so much, Célia and Willi, for that informative and fantastic presentation. Now we're moving on to the Q&A section of the webinar. Just a reminder for the audience, in order to ask questions, you can ask questions through the via questions widget. So that's the purple box. Just type them in the box at the top left-hand corner of your screen and click submit. We have a few questions already submitted from the audience. We'll start with the first one. Does LabTwin operate only in English, and how does it support different accents?
So I guess this one's for me. No, we don't operate only in English. We operate also in German, and this is being used also by DSM, the German model. We can operate in any language possible, depending on the cases. But right now, it's mainly English and German. We understand accents because the model is also trained with different accents. We have, I think, lately 22 different nationalities at LabTwin, and we're all testing the app every day. So it understands my French accent, for example. And we can also train it on specific accents, even if they're a bit challenging, with the audio recording of each user.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that answer.
If I may add one thing here, so that was indeed also something we actually tested. So we rolled out LabTwin on several sites, also in different countries, obviously. And on one of the sites, let's say we also have a rather strong accent, we realized, and the transcription accuracy in the beginning was not super great because of that. And that has then heavily improved within roughly 2 weeks. And then users were actually quite happy with the accuracy. So LabTwin indeed adapts over time to your own accent, and the transcription accuracy improves.
So much for that great answer. We have another question. At dsm-firmenich, do you see a fit for LabTwin in many departments, or is it rather some niche use cases?
It's certainly not just niche use cases. So when we started this pilot, we tested it in a lot of different departments because we indeed also had the same question. Is it now a tool which we can use across R&D? Can it only be used in the analytics department or only in, I don't know, for the molecular biologists, whatever? And then we obviously saw that there are people that like it more than others, as with every tool, but it was not something for one specific department, one particular use case, but it can be indeed used for a lot of use cases. So one thing we then also realized, so this protocol feature, for example, is great, but a lot of people also said, like, if I execute a protocol, I don't know, 3 times a week, I often don't need any documentation. I can do this from memory. Where they then actually see a lot of value is when they start developing new methods so that they can note down which settings they already tried, what failed, what observations they made, all these type of things in a really quick manner. And the method development is, of course, happening across departments and use cases. So I wouldn't say it's a niche thing. It's really used across departments. But also there, it's the more a person-specific thing. So a lot of people find it a bit weird to talk to themselves. So that can take a bit of time to adjust. But yeah, when people start using it, they usually use it a lot. Yeah.
Much for that response. Just a reminder, you guys can still submit your questions via the Q&A purple widget in the top left-hand corner of your screen. We have another question. How about ensuring e-compliance aspect of these platforms? Is the e-platforms validated?
So I assume the e-platform here is LabTwin. So we have achieved actually the ISO 27001 and 27017 certifications, and we are also ensuring that, of course, the data transfer is always secure with different level of encryptions.
Yeah, and also here, so we have a really strict IT department, which is a good thing. And this solution was approved. So it's now really a global solution. No major concerns. So from our end, it seems secure. Yeah.
For that response. So we have another question from the audience. Does this integrate only with select ELNs?
No, we are vendor agnostic, so we are happy to integrate with any ELN or LIMS or platform that is your own data repository. So right now I mentioned Peck and Elmer, but we are open to other collaborations.
Much. We have another question from the audience. Is this currently used in any commercial pharma QC labs, and is it GMP approved?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's actually in test in several GMP QC labs, but not yet approved. I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by approved, but we are still working on it together with some partners.
Thank you so much for that answer. That leaves us the end of our Q&A session. So it just leaves me to thank Willi and Célia for what was a great presentation, and to LabTwin and dsm-firmenich for sponsoring this session. To the attendees, you will receive an email shortly telling you how you can access the on-demand version of this webinar, or you can access it through our website, which is www.pmi-live.com. We look forward to sharing further webinars with you, so please do keep an eye on the website just mentioned, and follow us on Twitter at BRWebinars for daily updates, and join our LinkedIn group, Business Review Webinars. Thank you all once again, and I hope you have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone.